Welcome to my channel. Subscribe, listen, and enjoy my stories every day. The evening air was calm, almost too serene, as I reclined in the living room, the ambient light of the television flickering gently across the room. It was nearing 9, the time when the world outside began to quiet down, and the dramas of daytime TV gave way to the nightly news. That's when the phone rang, slicing through the tranquility like a sharp intake of breath. Startled, I reached for the receiver, the old-fashioned ringtone echoing off the walls. "Hello?" I answered, the TV muting in the background. "Is this Michael?" The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, deep, and carried a weight of hidden agendas. "Yes, speaking." "Who is this?" I straightened, sensing the unease that began to creep along the edges of the conversation. "Why are you trying so hard to get Sarah back when she chose me a long time ago?" the voice continued, a mix of annoyance and smugness painting his tone. I froze, the words not quite computing. "I'm sorry, who are you? What are you talking about?" My voice was a blend of confusion and a growing tinge of anger. "Don't play dumb, Michael. Sarah told me all about you. How you're the crazy ex-husband, stalking her, refusing to let her move on with her life." The room spun slightly as his words hit me. Sarah, my wife, the woman I had loved for over a decade, involved with someone else. And labeling me a stalker. It was ludicrous, unbelievable. Yet, the conviction in the stranger's voice was undeniable. "I think you've got the wrong idea," I managed to say, my grip tightening around the phone. "Sarah is my wife. We are very much together." "Who are you?" A chuckle, dry and bitter, echoed through the receiver. "Name's Rick. And trust me, buddy, the only thing you are right now is in denial. Check her phone if you don't believe me." The line went dead, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. My heart pounded in my chest as I lowered the receiver slowly, my mind racing. Could it be true? Was the foundation of my marriage nothing but a lie? Compelled by a mixture of fear and an urgent need for the truth, I went to our bedroom, where Sarah's phone lay charging on the bedside table. She was in the shower, the sound of water a steady background noise as I picked up her phone and started scrolling through. My hands trembled, and a cold sweat broke out across my forehead as I found what I was dreading: countless messages and calls to a number I didn't recognize, Rick's number, presumably. Each message was a punch to the gut, each call log a slap to my face. The deceit was glaring, undeniable. By the time Sarah emerged from the bathroom, wrapped in a towel, her expression one of casual normalcy, I was a changed man, burning with betrayal and the seeds of a dark resolve planting themselves in my heart. "Who's Rick?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside me. Her face drained of color, the towel gripped tighter around her. "I can explain," she started, but I was beyond wanting explanations. "No need. Just know this, Sarah, I will not be made a fool. And I will not let this slide." My voice was cold, a stark contrast to the heat of my rage. As she stood there, stammering apologies and excuses, I knew what I had to do. I would ruin her life as she had ruined mine. The divorce would be just the start. She would regret crossing me, and Rick would regret ever picking up that phone. Turning away, I left her there, my mind already plotting, calculating. The game had changed, and I was ready to play. The next morning dawned gray and overcast, mirroring the tumult inside me as I set about executing my plan. My first stop was at the office of the best private investigator in the city, a nondescript building tucked away in an alley, its facade as unassuming as the secrets it hid within. "I need everything you can find on a man named Rick Lawson," I said, sliding a photo across the desk to the investigator, a grizzled man with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "And I need it yesterday." He picked up the photo, eyeing it with a practiced indifference. "What's the interest?" "He's involved with my wife." I want to know who he is, what he does, where he goes, who else he's seeing. The PI nodded, scribbling down notes. I'll get on it. Anything else? Everything on my wife, Sarah. Phone records, texts, emails. I want to know what she's been hiding. Leaving his office, I felt a strange sense of detachment wash over me, as if I was watching someone else's life crumble. But there was no time for reflection. The next phase required a personal touch. I drove to Rick's place of work, a sleek office building downtown. Waiting outside, I spotted him arriving, looking every bit the confident usurper, unaware that his world was about to tilt on its axis. Confronting him was risky, but necessary. "Rick!" I called out as he crossed the lobby. He turned, surprise flickering over his face before settling into a guarded expression. "What do you want, Michael?" His voice was wary, a slight edge of defiance creeping in. "We need to talk. Now." I stepped closer, my presence enough to push him into a quiet corner away from curious ears. "I don't think there's anything to talk about," he countered, trying to keep his composure. "Oh, there's plenty. Like how you plan to handle the fallout when everyone finds out about you and Sarah. Or maybe you'd like to explain why you thought it was a good idea to call me and gloat." Rick's eyes narrowed, a flicker of concern betraying his cool facade. "Look, I don't know what Sarah told you, but I know enough, Rick. And soon, so will everyone else." The threat hung between us, palpable and sharp. "You wouldn't dare," he hissed, the veneer of control slipping. "Watch me." With that, I left him standing there, stewing in his newfound uncertainty. Back in my car, my phone rang. It was the PI. "Got something you might want to see," he said, his tone indicating the urgency. "What is it?" "It's big. Meet me." The pieces were beginning to fall into place, each one a stepping stone towards the retribution that awaited. As I drove to meet the PI, I knew that whatever he had found, it would only fuel the fire of my resolve. Sarah and Rick were about to learn just how devastating betrayal could be, and I was just getting started. In the dimly lit back room of a downtown cafe, the private investigator laid out the documents he had gathered. The air was thick with the aroma of coffee and whispered secrets. As I scanned the pages, each line further contorted the image of the life I thought I had. "Rick Lawson isn't just some fling," the PI began, pointing to a series of photographs and highlighted bank statements. "He's connected. Deeply. And not just to Sarah." I absorbed the images of Rick with various influential figures, some of whom I recognized. "What kind of connections are we talking about?" My voice was steady, fueled by a cold determination. "Political, for starters. And there's substantial financial movement between him and a few, let's call them questionable entities. It seems Mr. Lawson is more than a mere corporate player." The implication was clear: Rick was not only stealing my wife but also engaged in activities that could draw unwanted attention. "Perfect. And Sarah?" I asked, my fingers tightening around the coffee cup. "She's tied into some of his dealings. Whether she's a willing participant or just caught up in his wake, I can't say yet." "Keep digging," I instructed, sliding an envelope with additional payment across the table. "I need everything." After leaving the cafe, I headed to confront Sarah with this new information. The drive home was a blur, each mile a tightening coil of anger and calculation. As I entered, Sarah was in the kitchen, her back to me. "We need to talk," I announced, my voice echoing slightly in the quiet of the house. She turned, her face pale, sensing the severity of the moment. "Michael, Save it," I cut her off, throwing the photos of Rick with his associates on the counter. "I know about Rick's other activities. And your part in them." Sarah's eyes widened, her mouth opening but no words coming out. After a moment, she swallowed hard. I didn't know how deep it went, I swear. He said it was just some minor investments. Minor? Sarah, we're talking about connections that could ruin us both. Why? Why him? The questions poured out, each one laced with a mixture of rage and despair. I thought I was helping us. He promised that once things settled, we'd be set financially. You were always so busy, and I felt. I just wanted to feel useful. The confession hit like a punch to the gut. By betraying me. By risking everything we have. I'm sorry, Michael, I truly am, she pleaded, her voice cracking. No, sorry doesn't begin to cover what you're going to be. My reply was icy as I turned on my heel and left the room, her sobs trailing me as I went upstairs. I needed to think, to plan. Sarah's involvement, whether deep or superficial, had just added another layer of complexity to the situation. But it also gave me leverage. If I played this right, I could not only divorce her but do it in such a way that she'd be left with nothing. And Rick? He'd rue the day he decided to mess with my life. Sitting at my desk, I began drafting the documents that would spell the end for both of them. Each word on the paper was a nail in the coffin of my old life, and the blueprint of my revenge. The game was far from over, and I was just laying out my next move. The tension in the air was palpable as I arranged the final pieces of my plan into place. The weeks of surveillance, gathering evidence, and meticulous planning were about to culminate in a finale no one could have predicted, least of all Sarah and Rick. I had invited them both to a meeting at a private, upscale restaurant under the guise of discussing a settlement, something that would supposedly end our disputes amicably. They were suspicious, naturally, but the allure of possibly manipulating the situation in their favor was too tempting for them to resist. As they sat down at the table, their faces masks of cautious neutrality, I greeted them with a cold, dispassionate nod. Thank you for coming. I think it's best we settle this once and for all. Sarah, ever the hopeful deceiver, leaned forward. Michael, I really believe we can sort things out. We don't have to end everything like this. Rick nodded, his eyes darting between us. Let's just put everything on the table and figure a way out of this mess. I smiled, a humorless curve of the lips. I completely agree. Everything on the table, I reiterated, signaling to someone behind them. The door opened, and two figures stepped in, the private investigator and a police officer. Confusion and then horror dawned on Rick and Sarah's faces as they turned to see who joined us. What is this, Michael? Sarah's voice trembled, the facade beginning to crack. Justice, I said simply. You see, I know about all the fraud, the embezzlement, and the deceit. And now, so do the authorities. I gestured to the officer, who stepped forward, placing folders full of evidence on the table in front of them. Rick's face hardened as he realized the trap. You set us up. Indeed, I did. You stole my life, my peace, and my wife. I'm merely reclaiming what's mine and ensuring you pay for your crimes. The police officer moved to Rick's side, his hand resting on the handcuffs at his belt. Richard Lawson, you are under arrest for fraud and embezzlement. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. As the officer read Rick his rights and handcuffed him, I turned to Sarah, who was now pale as a ghost. And you, Sarah, will be investigated for your role in this. I've filed for divorce, and given the evidence of your infidelity and possible criminal activity, I doubt you'll see a dime of our assets. Sarah stood up, her chair scraping back violently. Michael, please, I didn't know how far it went with Rick. I thought it was just a game. I interrupted, my voice icy. Well, this is the endgame, Sarah. And you've lost. As they led Rick away, and Sarah sat back down, defeated and crying, I felt a bitter satisfaction. The revenge was harsh, yes, and the victory hollow, but justice, in its most primal form, had been served. I left the restaurant without a backward glance, the chapter of my life that included Sarah and Rick effectively closed. The road ahead would be lonely, perhaps, but it was free from the deceit and betrayal that had shadowed my former life. As I walked out into the cool evening, the weight of what I had done, and what I had lost, began to settle in. Yet, I knew one thing for certain: the poison of betrayal had been purged, and ahead lay a path that, though solitary, was undeniably mine to shape.